Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another chapter of Experiencer Interviews. And today we've got another amazing story coming to us from the US. We have Laura M. Clarke on board today. Laura is 66 years old and has been a stay at home mom for 45 years, and still is because her youngest son is bedridden and lives with her. She has lived everywhere from Arkansas to Alaska, but settled in New York State in the 1970s. Her abduction experiences started off as a child at the age of 5, where both her sister and herself were taken by the Greys, and again 2 years later. And trust me, that wasn't the end of it. So, Laura, thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome. It's good to see you. I know we're having technical difficulties, but let's try again.
Yeah, part three. Could you get into a bit of your family's backstory, where you grew up, and when did everything happen for you?
Sure. I had a pretty basic, normal life. My father was in psychology major. My mother was a maternity ward nurse, and we lived with my little sister in a small house on my grandparents' property in Fayetteville, Arkansas. My grandfather was a professor at the University of Arkansas, and we lived about 2 blocks from the Razorback Stadium, so we could hear the football games close by. And it was, pretty normal life. And then my dad decided to go into the Army, and so we moved. I think I was about 4 then. We moved to Fort Benning, Georgia, and then to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And after that, they stationed my dad up in Alaska, so we moved up to Fairbanks for 2 years. And my dad was a captain. He was a marksman, and excuse me. So we went to nursery school and kindergarten up there, and just had a normal life. It was very cold in the winter, warm and nice in the summer. My parents took us to see glaciers and Eskimo villages, and just to kind of get the full experience of what Alaska was about. So that was fun. But most of the time, we just stayed home, and we lived in a row house in a housing development in Fairbanks. And everything was normal until one night, my sister and I were sleeping, and I noticed movement outside in the hallway, and I thought it was my mom moving around. And all of a sudden, the curtains pulled back, and I could see light flood the hallway. Because, in the summertime, the sun is up almost 24/7. So light flooded the hallway, and I could see these 4 or 5 gray beings. I thought they were people, but they had no clothes on, and they were standing in our doorway. And next thing I knew, I saw the blanket slide off my sister, and she was moved in a standing position up over the floor. And I looked at her face, and she was sound asleep. Her eyes were closed, and she was just sort of hanging in midair, standing up. And they moved her out into the hallway over near the staircase. And next thing I knew, my blankets were sliding off with no visible means of how it was happening. And then I was moved into a standing position as well. And they moved me out of the room and over towards the top of the staircase. And I knew that I had to step down to go downstairs. So I was trying to move my legs and go down the stairs, but I was hovering in midair, so my legs were just spinning like in a bicycle motion. And the gray being next to me said telepathically, I could hear him in my mind, and I couldn't see his mouth move. He said, "You don't have to do that. We'll do that for you." So I stopped moving my legs, and he just hovered me down over the stairs into the living room. And I could see my sister and another gray being turn and go into the dining room, which leads through the kitchen and out the front door. And as we're going very slowly, I looked at this gray being and I realized that he was shorter than my mom. And my mom was 5'2" and my dad was 6'2". So I realized, you know, this thing was like 4.5 or less than 5 feet tall. And I asked him, I said, "Are you people like us?" And he answered me and said, "No, we are non-human living beings." And that always stuck in my mind. But then as we moved towards the dining room, I have missing time and I don't know what happened after that. All I know is that from that day forward, my sister was never the same. Um, I talked to my mom years later about all the abductions, and she said, "Oh my God, now I know what happened to your sister. She just changed overnight." And I said, "Well, that was why, because we were taken by the Greys." So that explained a lot for her. And, um, and then it wasn't long after that, maybe 6 months or so, we had the big earthquake in Alaska where the ground split in our backyard. And thank God we weren't in the epicenter. We were up in Fairbanks. And I think the epicenter was in Anchorage. But it was a very traumatizing event. And it wasn't, Vietnam was getting started right at that point. So my dad decided to get out of the army and go into corrections, working for prisons. So we moved down from Fairbanks to Iowa. And I believe it was in the first or second house that we lived in down there. I had another strange experience where I woke up and I was hovering in the air and I could see the roof of our house and I could see the swing set in the backyard and the deep ravine behind us that led over to my elementary school. And had the sense of floating and I could see going through the sliding glass doors. And then I was hovered over my bed and dropped on my bed face down on top of the blankets. And I could tell that I still had my nightgown on, but it was pulled up to my waist. And I could feel that my underwear was still on, so I was thankful for that. But I was about 7 years old at this point, and I suddenly felt a hard slap on my butt, and that kind of shocked me into full awareness. And I just laid there all tensed up, terrified, because my parents never spanked me, so that was something scary for me. And as I laid there on my bed, I could hear what sounded like footsteps, but it was as if someone was holding a pair of shoes and slapping them on the floor, like a fake walking sound. And my mom wore these leather loafers, and I assumed it was those because I heard them go out the hallway, across out my room, across the short hallway and into my parents' room. I heard the sliding closet door open and a clattering as if someone had dropped the shoes from like 3 feet up in the air. And I knew that couldn't be my parents because my parents were both very much perfectionists and they never just threw their things around. They would place them quietly on the floor. And then I heard the closet door slide shut again. And immediately after that, I heard a very strange, almost a robotic conversation in the hallway. And it was as if two robots or something were talking back and forth. And you got to remember in the early 60s, we didn't have push button phones or microwave dings or anything like that. There was no strange sounds in our lives back then. And it was like a pop boop ding, whir, and then there would be a pause and then something would answer it in the same weird tones. And this went on for a good while. And I was just terrified. But after a while, it went quiet and I saw the sun coming up. So I got the courage to flip over and crawl under the covers and look around. And I could see my sister was sleeping in her bed. But for weeks after that, I was nervous and jumpy and remember sitting in the dining room one night and I kept looking back behind me at the sliding glass door, and my mom said, "What's wrong? Why are you so nervous and jumpy?" And I said, "Well, can we can I move my chair so that my back is against the wall?" Because I didn't want anybody sneaking up behind me. I was very aware of my surroundings at that point because of this weird experience. And I knew I was awake. It was not a dream. So, but I always felt like I wasn't supposed to talk about it. Like I wasn't supposed to tell anyone. So I just kept everything to myself. And life went back to normal. My dad got a job as a warden of a small 100-man minimum security prison camp. So we spent some time over there hanging out with him and different things. And then we moved to Delavan, Wisconsin. And that was where I had, my third abduction experience. And this one I remembered a lot of. We were living in a 2-story craftsman house in town in Delavan. And one night I was trying to sleep and I suddenly realized there was a bright light outside, and it looked like a very bright street light. And I thought, well, that's strange. That's not a normal place for a street light. There were trees lining our street, and it wasn't normally that bright. And then I heard this weird sort of electronic little girl's voice, and it said, "Do you see the light? Do you want to come and play in the light? Isn't the light pretty?" And I thought, no, I have school tomorrow. I can't get up. But of course, the light didn't go away, so I was curious and I got up out of my bed and walked over to my window. And it was cracked open maybe 2 inches for fresh air. And I looked outside, and this light was actually coming from above our garage, which was right outside my window. I could see the driveway down below me because I was on the second floor. And so as I'm looking at this light, I realized there was a dark gray or black circle over it that was blocking out the stars, and just this strange beam of light coming down from the center of it. So as I'm trying to figure out what this was, I could feel my whole body start to tingle. And it was as if every cell in my body was vibrating apart. And at 9 years old, I knew nothing of, quantum physics or anything like that, but I could tell that my body was being taken apart cell by cell and separated. And then I had this sense of being lifted up and pulled through my entire window, glass, wood frame, and all. And I was completely aware of it, conscious. And I watched as my body was put back together on the other side of the window. And I was in midair about 20 feet off the ground. And so I was just floating there, staring at the beam of light. And when they put me back together, I felt myself being pulled forward towards the beam of light. And then I went to the left of it and up into like a hatch door that was in the floor of this craft. And once I was up inside it, I noticed that the entire interior was like a metallic, like stainless steel or something, sort of reflective, but I could just tell it was all metallic. And it was facing a wall. And then I was turned to my right and I saw a hallway. And the walls were coming up at an angle so that, they were like angled. I don't know if you can see that, angled like this, so that if you went too far to the right, you would bump your head on the slanted part. Well, I was hovered down the center of this hallway and I went past maybe 2 doors. And I could tell each doorway led into a little room that was sort of like a triangular pie shape. And by the time I got to the third door on my left, I could see ahead of me there was a large room straight ahead. And I glanced inside it and I could see like 2 little chairs that appeared to be coming up out of the floor like they were attached to the floor or part of the floor. Some kind of little controls and maybe either a window or a screen of some kind. There wasn't much in there, but it was a larger room. And instead of going into that room, I was turned to my left and taken into the third triangular shaped room. And there was a metallic, like a doctor's exam looking table. It was also attached to the floor. And I was laid on that, and it was very cold and hard. And after a while, I could sense that there was something evil behind me. And I just wanted to know what it was. So I kind of I tilted my head back and looked over my shoulder. And behind me were two of the grays. And in between them was a very large, 5 or 6 foot tall, solid black praying mantis. And I was just shocked. I felt like he was giving orders to the grays, and I was terrified, and I couldn't look at it anymore. So I turned my head back around and looked near my feet, and next to my feet was a wall of what looked like fish tanks. And they were all connected from floor to ceiling, wall to wall, and they were emanating a beautiful blue light, and that had a calming effect on me. So I just focused on that instead of what was behind me. And next thing I knew, there was someone appeared in the doorway, and I looked over to my right, and there was what looked like a little girl gray. And I say a girl because this one had long, thin black hair, and her eyes were huge football shaped, slanted like the other grays, but they were not as big. And I had the feeling she was trying to tell me that she was my sister. And I thought, well, I know what my sister looks like. The opposite of me. My sister Barb had short, mousy brown hair and big blue eyes and a turned up nose. And this thing telling me it's my sister looked like the grays. The only similarity was the long, thin, dark hair. Me. And I have green eyes, so I wondered, like, I had the thought, were my parents involved in this somehow? Was this genetic? Is she really my sister? I didn't know how it worked at 9 years old, but that's what she was telling me. And after that, I remember being taken back to my room and floated into my room and laid on my bed again, stuck face down. And I was pulled into this position where my left leg was bent up and my right arm was bent up and my head was facing left. And I heard a voice say, "From now on, you will have trouble sleeping. And if you get in this position, it will help you sleep." And I literally have had severe insomnia ever since that abduction. So my sister and I had separate rooms at that point, so I thought nobody knew anything had happened to me. So the next morning when my dad was leaving for work, I stopped him at the doorway and I said, "I got to tell you guys something. I got to tell you what happened to me last night." And my mom and dad were listening and they were like, "Oh, that was just a dream. Don't worry about it." And my sister was behind me saying, "It wasn't. That's not all that happened." And my mom said, "Now, be quiet. This is your sister's dream." And I said, "No, it's not a dream. It's real. It really happened." And my mom looked at my dad and said, "You think she does know something?" And that stuck in my head too, because why would she say it like that? You think she does know something? And my father said, "I got to get to work. We'll talk about this later." So I waited and waited and we never talked about it again. Um, so I was kind of upset about that, but I knew I felt like I shouldn't push it because they were denying what I was telling them, saying it was a dream, and I knew it wasn't a dream. And many years later, a- after I had finally started talking about the abductions, I was driving with my boyfriend and my sister. Sister was in the back seat, and my oldest son was with us. We were going to a gig because my boyfriend was in a band. And on the way down, I just felt like I should tell that story when I was 9 years old. And then it was complete silence after I stopped talking, and I felt stupid. Oh, I shouldn't have told it. Now I'm embarrassed. And all of a sudden, out of the back seat, my sister said so loud, "Oh my God, I remember that night." And I went, "What? You do?" And I turned around and I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I woke up to a bright white light coming through the windows, and I went to your room and I couldn't find you. You were not in your room." She says she went to our parents' room, couldn't wake them up, and she ran downstairs at night in her nightgown in the dark. She said she was out in our driveway looking at the craft above our garage with the light coming down. She was 8 years old. She said she was stomping her bare feet on the driveway, yelling at this thing, "Don't take her, take me. Don't take her, I'll fight back," and she won't. And that just blew me away, that she remembered that and she had had that experience, which I never knew. I thought it was just me that I had experienced it. But she woke up and saw that I was gone out of the house, and she saw the craft above our garage. So we started talking about it more and more, and I ended up writing a letter to Bud Hopkins, the researcher, and he had us come down to New York City to his apartment, and he interviewed me and hypnotized me for a couple hours. Um, nothing ever came of it because he was very busy doing movies and books, and he didn't get to talk to me much again, except on the phone a little bit. But, so, as always, life goes on. From 9 years old, our parents got divorced while we were living in the house. Once we moved in with our dad, my stepmother had left after a few years, and I was around 12 or 13. And another event happened where I was looking forward to listening to The Hobbit on the radio. They were reading the book over the airwaves, and so I went in the bathroom and I was brushing my teeth, getting ready for bed. And I went back to my room, and as soon as I opened the door, I realized something was different. My ceiling light was off, and I knew I had left it on. And I stepped into the room and suddenly felt completely exhausted, suddenly, just out of nowhere. And I stumbled over to my bed and I fell down on the bed, turned over on my back, and I saw that my closet light was on. I had one of those closets with sliding bifold doors, and I never left the light on in that, but I could see that the light was on in my closet. So I thought, well, maybe my sister's in there playing a practical joke on me, but why am I so tired? And as I'm thinking this, I saw the bifold door slide open and out stepped one of the graves. And I said, "Oh, that's why." And then I passed out, and the next thing I remember was being floated back into the condo through the front door and back into my bedroom. And that's all I remember of that event. But then, life went back to normal. I got mono, I got sick and dropped out of high school later on, and tried working in a factory during the day and ended up getting married at 16. And about a year later, we moved to New York State, and I've been here ever since. And I went through some crazy stuff and ended up living with my second husband's trailer in 7 wooded acres of land with our 2-year-old son. And that's when the next event happened that was very traumatizing. Um, One night I was sitting on the couch watching TV, and my husband was doing his paperwork because he had his own furniture business and repairing furniture. So he was doing paperwork, and I suddenly got this feeling, oh no, they're here, meaning the Greys. And I got scared, so I I just sat there nervously and I could feel them watching us. And all of a sudden, my husband stood up and just walked very slow, like a robot, just very slow towards the bedroom. And he wasn't answering me. I said, "Are you going to bed?" And he wouldn't answer me. So I got up and I was literally running around him in circles. "Are you okay? Are you going to bed? What are you doing?" He wouldn't answer me, just staring straight at him. He walked straight to the bed very slowly, laid down in it, and he was out. I couldn't wake him up. So I shut off the TV and all the lights, and I went back to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. And I knew that they were watching. And all of a sudden, the trees started blowing around like crazy. Like big wind came up, and then a bright light turned on, and it was right over the trailer. And I could see the light coming, through the windows. And I felt like a rat trapped in a maze, and I knew they were watching. And if it was the Greys, there was nothing I could do about it. But I had this silly thought, oh, there's a nightlight on in the kitchen. If I shut that off, I won't be able to sleep. So I ran into the kitchen, shut the nightlight off. And as I turn around to go back to the bedroom, I noticed there was some little thing standing in the middle of the kitchen. And I looked down, and it was shorter than my son, who was 2. It had this very round, white, smooth, basketball-sized head, 2 tiny black eyes, and that's all I could see. Sitting on top of what looked like a white lab coat type of room that went all the way to the floor, from its neck to the floor. I couldn't see hands or feet or anything, and I'm staring at this thing, and I'm thinking, well, he's shorter than my son. And this thing answered me and said, "Huh, yes, but we are very, very old." And he dragged out the word old, and that really scared me. And I'm thinking, what? Hundreds, thousands of years old? What? And I ran past him and I turned around so that my back was against the kitchen window. And I heard the front door jiggling. I knew I had locked it. But all of a sudden, after this sound, the door swung open and 4 or 5 of the gray beings came floating in. And they were doing a weird motion that I had never seen before, where they were pushing their arms and legs forward as if they were propelling themselves that way. And then they would stop and turn and look at me. And as I'm staring at them, I saw one of them float past me and had what I thought it was heading down the hallway to do something with my son or my husband. But within seconds, it just came right in front of me and parked itself like 4 or 5 inches from my face. And here I am staring into these big black eyes. And it was trying to like play mind games with me. It was trying to make me feel like I was supposed to be a worthless dog cowering at his feet on the floor. And I started to feel, down and depressed and I feel, yes, I should be on the floor crying. And then I realized, no. And I picked my head up and stared him right in the eyes and I said, I am not a dog. And he just kept staring at me and I noticed that inside these big black slanted football shaped eyes are big giant black pupils inside the football shaped eyes. And I had never seen that before. But here I was within inches of it. And I could see the gray skin and the pointy chin and the slit for a mouth and tiny nostrils. And I noticed that the skin looked like there were weird, random, wrinkly lines running through it, almost like a cowhide. If you see rough cowhide that's not completely smooth, there's funny lines in it. That's what his skin looked like up close. And I noticed a horrible smell. It was like a combination of sweet spices and mixed with vomit and urine. And it was making me want to throw up. And as I'm standing there, I'm trying to pray, Jesus, Lord God, help me. And the thing said to me, "Huh, yes, we know God too." And that scared me even more. Because, okay, if they know God, what's really going on here? And they took me outside of our trailer, and out in the yard, I could see the same thing I saw when I was 9, a black circle blocking out the stars with the beam of light coming down from it. And um, I could sense that they were taking me up into that. And then I don't remember anything except for them bringing me back into the trailer at sunrise. So this abduction started about 10 o'clock at night and ended at sunrise. And I'm being floated down the hallway, and I noticed that my clothes felt like they were vacuum suctioned to my body, and I felt cold and clammy. And by the time they put me in my room, I could feel the vacuum suction feeling go away, and my clothes were hanging normally. And they set me down on the floor, so I just stood there, and I could hear, almost imperceptible, but it was more like a vibration than a sound. But it was as if someone was rolling a giant metal ball bearing around in a stainless steel mixing bowl. That was the sound that I could hear. And then I heard helicopters coming, and all of a sudden, the tree started blowing around all around the trailer again, and the beam of light just shut up. And poof, I could hear the craft leave. And then 1, 2, 3, I heard helicopters fly directly over our trailer in its path, going the same direction it had left, and towards my best friend's house. So I hear these helicopters. I didn't see them, and I just said, "Oh, it's over." I laid back and went to bed. Slept a long time. Woke up late the next day. My son was okay, but I had to pee really bad. And I went and sat in the bathroom for what felt like 10 minutes. My belly was all bloated, and I just kept peeing and peeing. And I looked down and saw right below my belly button was a circle. It was bright red, like a new scab, right about an inch below my belly button. And I'm looking at it, wondering what that was. And I start to pull at it, and it was like a scab attached to a long sheath of tissue. And I kept pulling and pulling and pulling, and it was about 4 inches long that had come up out of deep in my belly. So I didn't know what that was. I laid it on a piece of tissue, and then I went to wipe myself, and I looked at the tissue, and there was a circle of oily substance on it. And half of it was like an amber orange oily liquid, and the other half was like a deep yellow oily liquid. And they were touching in the middle, but they were not mixing. And I set that aside. I said, "That's really weird." And then I started thinking, I have to show this to somebody, my doctor or somebody. And I realized nobody's going to believe me. What's the point? I can't afford lab tests. I don't know what to do. So I just got mad and I threw it all away. I went to check on my son. And later, as I was doing dishes, I said, "You know what? I'm tired of this stuff happening. I've got no records of it." So I turned around with my wet finger and I poked it on the calendar, and I circled that date. And I said, "This is the night it happened. I'm going to remember it this time." So I just kept that memory of it. I drew a little UFO to remind myself on that date. And I still have the calendar, which I sent you pictures of. And then I wanted to just have a normal conversation. So I called my best friend and just wanted to get back to normal. But she said, "You won't believe what happened last night." And I said, "What?" She goes, "Well, at sunrise, I heard the dogs barking, so I went outside. She saw what she thought was a large gray owl with huge eyes sitting in a tree out in her backyard, and right above it was a UFO. And she had never believed in that kind of thing, so she was just in shock standing there looking at this thing. And then she said all of a sudden, around sunrise, she heard helicopters coming. And she stood there and watched as this craft left, the owl disappeared, or what she thought was an owl. And she watched as 3 military helicopters flew chasing this thing. She witnessed the helicopters that had just left my house. So she was kind of a witness. And she said she called her dad, and he said, "Oh, don't worry about it. Nobody's going to do anything. Don't bother calling the police or the military. Nothing's going to happen." And so we just dropped it, got back to normal life again. And then the next thing that happened was I had gotten divorced and gotten involved with someone else and had another baby. So here I was with 2 little kids, 5-year-old and a baby, living in an apartment alone because I had broken up with the baby's father. And my son was getting ready to start kindergarten. And one night the kids were asleep and I suddenly got really tired and crawled in bed. I was woken up later to a voice saying, "Go to your son, he needs you." So I jumped out of bed, I went to his room, and he was laying in bed, not normally, like normally you lay on a pillow with your head on the pillow and your shoulders down below it. He was laying as if someone had placed him with his upper body, head and shoulders on top of the pillow, and the blankets were folded neatly across his chest. But what scared me was there was blood pouring out of his nose. I could watch it run like a faucet. His entire face was covered in blood, down to his neck, his pajama top. But there was no blood on the pillow, no blood on the sheets, nothing. It was just all on him. And we didn't have a phone at that point, so I ran down to my neighbor and I pounded on her door and I asked her to call for help. Instead, she came up to my apartment and sat in a chair next to my son's bed by his head and didn't say a word. So I'm running around her trying to get washcloths and stop the bleeding. And I finally said to her, "Please go call for help." And she left and never called for help. So I had to take my son to the doctor the next day and they did x-rays and couldn't tell what caused all the bleeding. But I asked him, I said, "Do you remember anything from last night?" And he said, "Well, there was a skeleton man in my room and took me out of the house." And he also said that one of our neighbor's little boys who was his age, was in the room with him. And he said that these skeleton men took them both out of his room, but he didn't remember anything after that. And I got so mad, I just looked up at the sky and I said, "It's one thing to take me and, for me to have to put up with this all my life, but don't you touch my children." I was, really angry. And after that, we moved upstate near Albany, New York, and I've been up here ever since. I bought a house in the country 38 years ago, and my son, my oldest son, he has memories of other experiences while living here. When he was a kid, he said he remembered waking up and trying to escape the grays out in the yard and things like that. I don't know the details of his account. We haven't talked about him that much, but, um, so that's the majority of my story. But since then, one of my daughters lives 2 doors down from me. And one day, her and my grandkids were driving home, and my grandson noticed this big metallic ball hovering in the air near a rock cliff. And he pointed it out to my daughter, and they all looked. And there was a helicopter with no markings on it, like solid gray, sort of pinning it against the rock cliff, like not letting it fly away. and hovering in the air, and they thought that was very strange. They said the metallic ball was about 20, 30 feet across. And after that, we saw these unmarked gray helicopters all over our area for weeks after that. And then later on at their house, they had seen some black metallic balls hovering over their yard. One was over a tree stump of a giant old tree that they had just cut down. And my son-in-law said they were about 6 feet across, big enough to hold a person inside. But they were metallic and black. And their dogs had noticed them. They were looking out the window, staring at them. My granddaughter saw them. And another one was across the street at my neighbor's garage. And before they told me about those, that night that they had shown up, I was trying to sleep in my bed, and I could sense that something was outside my bedroom window, but I was too tired to get up, and it sounded like crickets in a recording on a loop, like 30 seconds of crickets and then being replayed over and over again, and I fell asleep. And it was the next day after that that my daughter told me about the black metallic balls over their yard, my neighbor's yard. So I'm assuming one of them was near my house too. And we don't know what those were. They were drones or part of the UFO thing. Over the years, my son-in-law had explained how he was in the military. He was in the Army for 10 years. And he had also been stationed up in Alaska at one point. And he was put in charge of guarding a door in a deep underground military base. And he said it was like 10 stories down or something. And he is the kind of guy, he's very smart. He didn't just like taking orders. He was curious. He wanted to know what was in that room because he was ordered to shoot to kill whatever came out of it. So he questioned, well, what am I guarding? And that's when they sent him over to Afghanistan. So he never found out what he was guarding, but he did almost die. He broke his ankles and a lot of stuff happened to him, but he survived. Got out of the military, he has PTSD and all that. So it's been quite a journey.
Could you get into your experience that happened at the Pink Floyd concert?
Oh, yeah. That was not a UFO experience, actually. That was a near-death experience. And I had always believed in God since I was a little kid. My parents never took us to church, but before we had moved from Fayetteville, Arkansas, my grandma said, let me take the girls to church one time before you move away. And so my grandma took us up in the pews with her, and I heard the most powerful hell and damnation preaching I've ever heard in my life to this day. And it stuck with me. At 5 years old, I wasn't scared. I just suddenly knew that Jesus, God was real, heaven and hell were real. And then I just sort of kept it to myself, not growing up in church. And so by the time I was in high school, after I had gotten sick and dropped out of school, I had a boyfriend who wanted to go to a Pink Floyd concert up in Milwaukee. This was before I got married. So he and I went up one day overnight, spent the night in a hotel, and we're standing out in the parking lot of the baseball stadium for hours waiting for the concert to open. And we all got dehydrated and sunburned. And by the time the concert started after dark, I was really wiped out. We got inside, put our blankets on the infield. We got a good seat in front of the stage. And I basically just laid down from exhaustion. And I felt myself sitting back up. And I heard like a suction sound, like my spirit was leaving my body. And I felt better, like I didn't feel the sunburn. I felt good. But suddenly I realized I was floating higher and higher above the stadium and going out into the stars. And as I'm going out facing forward, I see this beautiful being of light coming towards me from a far off distance. And it was like a man with long hair wearing golden robes, and he was glowing from the inside out, fully lit from the inside, like a nightlight, just glowing. And as he got close to me, I said, "Is God real?" Because I wanted that confirmation. And he said, "Yes." And we had this very long conversation. And then he told me I had to return to my body. And I said, "Okay." I felt like I was armed with the truth. I was going to come back and become a nun and be holy. All these things that he had told me were good. So he said, "No, you will not be allowed to remember everything we just talked about." And my heart sank. I was like, I don't want to go back then. I don't want to go back to my life the way it was. And I begged him, I said, "Please let me remember something. What one thing can I take back with me?" And he said, "Okay, remember this. Remain humble." And I said, "Okay." And I turned around and I saw far below me the earth hanging like a beach ball in the sky. Round. It's not flat. It was hanging in the sky, and there were stars all around it, and I could tell that the sun was far off to our left because the earth was half lit by sunlight and the other half was dark. So I knew that I had left my body at nighttime, so I had to go to the dark side of the earth. And I said, "Lord, it's so far away. How am I going to find my body?" And he said, "Follow the silver cord." And I looked down at my waist and I saw a very shiny, long, umbilical like cord attached to my waist that led all the way down to earth. So I started plunging feet first. And the whole way down, I was repeating, "Remain humble, remain humble, remain humble. And God is real." Just like that, over and over again. And then I got closer to the stadium. I could hear the concert still going. And I noticed that there was an L-shaped parking lot. And all the cars were lined up like little matchbox cars in this parking lot. And I could see it all from above, and I got closer and closer, and I saw my boyfriend sitting there, and I could see my body laying on the blanket. And I just went right to it and laid back down into it. And when I came to, like I was still conscious, but when I realized I was in my body, it felt so heavy, like I could barely move. And I started to stir around, and my boyfriend said, "Oh, you're alive." I said, "Hey, yeah, I think so." So after that, we went back home, and I was severely sunburned, and had to recover from that. But yeah, that was my first out of body experience. And years later, I read in the Bible, Ecclesiastes 12:6, "When the silver cord be loosed." And I knew instantly that means when the silver umbilical cord breaks, we can no longer return to our body. That's when we are separated and our spirit goes to God and our body dies. So I just knew instantly what that meant.
Now, you said earlier that the mantid was evil. Did the mantid do anything bad to you?
Not that I remember. I just knew that it was evil before I even looked at it. And I just had this horrible sense of fear more than ever before. Normally, I wasn't too terrified during these abductions, but that time I was because of that.
Could you describe the face of the Greys that you've met?
Yeah, there were what you see as a typical gray described, very skinny bodies, large bulbous heads with a pointy chin, just a slit for a mouth as if someone, stuck a butter knife in clay, just like a slit. And tiny nostrils where a nose should be, no visible ears, and just those huge football shaped slanted eyes.
Reading of an excerpt of Laura's personal diary. He confirmed that the 20 to 30 crafts that always abducted me were like little shuttlecrafts because they were the ones with the bright white light coming from the bottom. He also confirmed that the type of being I saw once with the Greys is the all-black praying mantis, who are the Greys' bosses or leaders. That one black one is the scariest one I saw. And I told him how the Greys smell. Like a mixture of vomit and sweet spices. Repulsive. He agreed that is how they smelled, and he always wondered what the Grey's skin is made of, because he believes the suits are grown on them or something. I told him it has to be cowhide because I was standing not more than 4 inches in front of one when I was 22. I could clearly see the skin's texture was just like rough, bumpy textured cowhide with no hair on it. I clearly saw right into the Grey's eyes too. Huge black football-shaped eyes, slanted with a gigantic darker black pupil inside. No whites in the eyes, just black and black. No real mouth, just a slit. No real nose, just little holes. Long skinny neck, long skinny body, long hands and feet. Finger and toes were long. They propel their bodies by swinging their arms and legs forward while hovering right above the floor. Bizarre, almost like they are swimming through the air standing up. Some things I will never forget.
To finish off the interview, Laura, do you have a closing statement or perhaps a final story that you might want to get out?
Several years ago, I asked God why I had to go through all these experiences. And he said to me, I gave you a sound mind, even an extra sound mind, so that you may be a testimony of it. So I do believe I am supposed to share my stories and that these things are real. And I personally believe that the military is involved. And my friend Murray up in Canada is also an abductee, and we both realized that we both have O negative blood type, and that has apparently become common knowledge that abductees can have O negative blood type blood.
Hopefully one day you're going to get your story into a book.
I'll try it.
Well, Laura, thank you so much for coming on. And to those watching, hope you enjoyed today's interview. I'm your host, Mr. Great. More interviews coming up, and I'll see you guys next time. So take care, everyone.
Hello everyone, this is Mr. Great, and thanks for watching today's episode. If you are an abductee, contactee, or experiencer, and you believe that your story could help others, please feel free to contact me through my YouTube channel email. When it comes to experiencers, the ET phenomena, and the future, remember, truth will out.